So hey, thank you that you're all here for my talk today. I'm Isa, and because I had a lot of performance issues with my demo version of the game I'm working on, I learned a bit about how to prevent that performance issues. And or one of the reasons for performance issues are batches if you have a bigger game. So that's why I decided to make a talk here about the stuff I learned from my observations. So performance issues, take a look at your batches. So I will cover what are batches in general, also called draw calls, maybe you heard of them. A bit of triangles, but that are not related to the batches in this case. Then GPU instancing, dynamic batching, static batching, I will cover all of that. SSAO and textures. So in general, the batches are not only a Unity thing, it's also for other engines, because this is related to the GPU of your computer, or of the computer of your players. But my examples that I show you are also all based in Unity, but it's, yeah, don't worry about that, batches are a general thing. So, yeah, what are the batches, or where can I find them? So this is the Unity example. When you have your game screen and open the statistics, then you have some numbers here. So batches, then save by batching, whatever this means. I will cover that, of course. Then here the triangles and also the set pass calls. This is also a thing that is related to batches a bit. But yeah, so these are the numbers I'm talking about. So I just turned off my character here, and you can see the batches are lower. Before it was 377, now it's 327. So this means my character was responsible for 50 batches, which is a lot for one object. Imagine if all the objects in the scene would have 50 batches, then you have a lot of batches at the end. So this character is not optimized. That's why it produces so many batches. And also the triangles here that you can see, the character has 150,000 triangles. If you have an army of, 10,000 characters in the scene, this would be a massive overload. So the whole character is not optimized. But yeah, these are the numbers. This was just an example here. So, but now, what are batches? And what happens when you are using that batches, or when the computer is using that batches? So first of all, the engine reads all your vertices of every object, including the color, the UV, the normals, and the tangents. So for every object in the scene. Then it reads the material, the shader, or the material shader, and the texture. Then the engine, also the CPU, sends all the information to the GPU so that the GPU can draw that stuff. And then the GPU draws. So for every single object. So in general, a batch is a package with data that will be sent to the GPU. And a general thing is the fewer batches, the better it is. And you have to think about that each frame, that this happens each frame. And for a 60 FPS game, this will happen 60 times per second. So if you have a lot of batches, well, it's a lot of work to do. So that's also, or you will also hear about that the batches are expensive or bad. The reason is that the CPU has to send data to the GPU, which I said before, but this process can be very slow. And the goal is to reduce this amount of communication between the CPU and the GPU. So if the GPU has just a few batches, it's fine. It can render everything, and no problems, no performance issues. But if you have too many batches and the GPU can't handle them anymore, they are in a queue and somehow stuck, and then the performance issues start. So like lagging and FPS drops, stuff like this. So this is a big reason for these issues, if you have too many batches. So the rule of thumb here is that you should have around less than 1,000 batches, but this also depends how good your GPU is or your CPU. It also depends on your target device. If you want to develop games for, let's say, the Switch or Steam Deck or something, you really have to be less than 1,000 batches. that's my own experience. So Steam Deck was lagging with more than 1,000 batches around that number. So you should have less than that. For the triangles here, it's said that you should have less than 1,000K for mobile and less than 1 million for PC. And for the Z-pass calls, it's also the less the better. I won't cover the Z-pass calls in general yes for this topic here, but since it's a bit connected, just try to reduce them as well. The Z-pass calls are stuff that is shader related. The more different shaders you have with more complex stuff in it, the more Z-pass calls you have as well. So here I use the plane for a ground, and we have already 1,200 triangles in an empty scene with just a plane. And for the same thing, I use the cube, and we have just 76 triangles. So a big error or a common mistake for beginners is that they are using planes for grounds or for other stuff, where you can also use cubes for the same result, which has less triangles. So this is also the reason why a cube is, it may has 8 sides, but 6 sides. 6 sides, sorry. Yes, 6. But it's just divided once, while a plane splits itself the bigger the plane is. And this is why the plane has a lot more triangles, so you should use cubes instead of planes if it's possible. That's just a side thing. Let's go back. I added to this same scene a cube. I split this cube up into 4 parts for each side and colored them with different materials. And it adds 96 triangles and 8 batches, which is a lot because a normal cube, we had it here, wasn't that much in total, in general. So the goal is to prevent using materials a lot, or a lot of materials for one object. This reduces the batches and also the triangles because you can use a different cube for that, which I did here. It's the same output basically, but with a texture, and it adds just 2 textures and 24 triangles. So reduce materials. When I turn the shadow on, then we have more batches, 3 at once, at the same time. So for just one shadow, it adds 3 batches, and 36 triangles just for shadowing. So this may be a bit confusing because this number is increasing, but the triangles in the scene are the same. So why is this increasing? The reason in this case is that this number here is not the triangles that are in the scene, but the triangles that are sent to the GPU. So it covers also the stuff that is hit by lighting or shadows. So even if you have let's say an object with 2 triangles, it will be 6 here. And this can sum up a lot in your game later, if you have a lot of objects. And to explain it just a bit more, or to go a bit deeper how these batches are created, I have an empty scene here. This empty scene has 1 batch and 2 triangles. And when I add my cube without lighting and shadows, it adds 1 batch and 12 triangles, because this cube has in total 12 triangles, and it adds 1 batch, and this batch is just for, draw this cube. This is the basically the command that the CPU is sending to the GPU. And when I turn the light on, but the shadow is still off, it adds 12 triangles and 1 batch. That's why we have 3 here, 3 batches. And when I turn the shadow on, it adds 4 batches at once. So just for turning on the shadow, which is, so shadow is bad. That's also a thing why a lot of, or why it's recommended to bake shadows, because then you can reduce this shadow batches. I just call them now shadow batches. I have the scene and I don't know why I have the scene. So it's a cube with a shadow in total with 13 triangles. I added the ground, in the background. So and here comes the problems. Now I have a lot of cubes, let's say this is an army of soldiers or something, or whatever. Now I have just added this in 480 batches. A lot of triangles. Okay, we can't do anything about that because they're just here. But the goal is now to reduce these batches. So maybe it's possible that the CPU can just say, hey, draw this 480, and the GPU says, okay, I do it just once, instead of 480 times. And this is possible. That's where GPU instancing, dynamic batching, or static batching comes into place. I start with the GPU instancing. You can find that in the shaders of Unity here. This is the thing you should enable every time, or in general. It's off by default, sadly. So this GPU instancing renders copies of a mesh with the same material in a single draw call. And they can also have different colors or scales. But the game object must have a mesh renderer, of course, otherwise you wouldn't see it in the scene. But here's the note that skinned mesh renderers, what is often used for animated objects that are not working. And it also supports the bake global illumination system. That means when you are baking the scene with the shadows and the light, then also this enabled GPU instancing can be used. So I just turned it on the material, and from 480 batches we have just 10 left and saved 470. So just with a single material option on. In Unity, the next topic is then the dynamic batching, because for the other batching that's nothing more to say. You have to set on that automatic manually, because it's off by default in the settings. So the dynamic batching is just for meshes below 900 vertex attributes, which means so all the shader calculations and everything must be under 900, below 900, and in general 225 vertices. So for single small objects that's good to use, but not for complicated objects. It's for objects with the same material, or that they must have the same material. Also with light maps, they must point to the same light map location, and you can use it for built-in particle systems, for line renderers and trail renderers. And yeah, it needs to return on manually. So here's the same scene with the dynamic batching on. It was here with the off. So it's the same like when we had the material activated, the GPU instancing. So we have 10 batches and save 470 by drawing that cubes. Now I have a mesh with more than 225 vertices. So I have my furnace here that I'm using in my game. This has more than 225 triangles. So the draw call batching and the dynamic batching is not working here. So this is with the dynamic batching that is on. We have 448 batches. It's not working. Nothing is saved. So with the GPU instancing on, we are back to our 10 batches and saved the rest, which is nice. So another option to save save batches is static batching. This is for objects that are active in the scene and static, so they are not moving, and you have to return to tell the engine, hey, that's a static object. Yep, so they must be active and has a mesh filter and all that stuff that you can see the object. In the mesh itself, the read-write must be enabled and the vertex count must be over 0, which I think is, yeah, it should be, every object should have a vertex count over 0, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. And it shouldn't be combined with the other mesh. And for the shader, disabled batching must be off. This is a shader internal comment or thing. So the static batching is by default on in the project settings. You don't have to do anything for this. You can read all that stuff in the Unity manual or other engine manuals. I think that's the same. So with static batching on, I have just one draw call additionally, and all the rest is saved by this batching. But I can't move that stuff. That's the problem here. But if you have, I don't know, trees or other plants in the scene that will never move or that are just there for, to look nice, the static batching is the way to go. The problem is when I change the color during runtime, then my batches are broken up, and just part of them are saved and part of them not. That's because the material is instantiated, and this creates new batches. You can check all that stuff in the frame debugger in Unity. There is it sums up all your draw calls or batches in this case. So in this case we had the dev path, which is basically the drawing of the base mesh. It was 106 for the furnaces here and 1 for the cube. And then we have the render forward opaque render, so putting the color on basically. This was for 114 batches here for this stuff. And in total we saved the shadow data. That's what I figured out, because the shadow map was just 4. In general, it's better when you have a frequently changing materials during runtime. And it's better to make different materials with the color you want and change the materials instead of changing the color, because this doesn't create new batches like here. This was the one before. But it's a instance just a few of them, so basically the 3 for one material. In this case, so I have 3 materials, that's why I'm saying 3. So 3 of the furnaces are instantiated and the rest is saved by batching. So in general, you should, because of that, you should swap the materials instead of changing the color, because changing the color creates an instance of this material, and swapping the materials doesn't create an instance and doesn't break the batches. Well, I already come to the SSAO, so the screen space, ambient occlusion, and textures, because this is also a thing that creates batches. Here I have a setting with 3 textures and 3 objects with 3 textures, so 1 each, and this creates 3 materials. So that's a bit of math here. I have 6 batches plus the 12 of the objects here is in total 18. So each of these objects has 4 batches. One of them is for drawing the game object, then 1 the material, then 1 for the light and the shadow, and 1 is also for the SSAO. And if I turn it off, I have just 3 batches for each object. So if you have a big scene and turning on the SSAO, then every object will also render or create one of these batches. Here's my same scene again, because this is already, except for the character, optimized. It's not so much, but if it wouldn't be an optimized scene, turning on the SSAO would make a huge difference. I had that problem on the Steam Deck when I created my demo version here, where everything was not optimized. So you have to decide if you have a big scene, if you want to turn it off or on, or what is also recommend that you can, or that you let the players choose to turn it on or off in the settings or something. If they have a good device, they can turn it on, and if they have a better device and everything is lagging a bit, they can just turn it off. A lot of games are handling this like that. Here's another example of my game. I have a lot of objects here instantiated during runtime, and that's why the batches here are increasing a lot, because these are not, they're still not optimized, and there are also, every object here creates batches. And here you can see that it makes a larger difference if I turn the SSAO off. So I optimized these 3 items here now. They have just 1 material now and 1 texture. but there are still 3 different objects. And so they created just 3 batches because there were 3 objects, but we saved now 6 instead of 0. So, and here I turned the SSA on again, and it changed from 3 batches to 6 batches, and not just 1. What have I done here? just a second. Yeah, I figured out the light and shadow were 2 in this case, the SSAO 4 are right, because 3 objects, 3 SSAO and 1 object. Okay, I think it was the background, right? The background is also creating 1. Or no, 3 was the background and 1 was the object. Sorry about it. I checked that here in the frame debugger again. We have 10 batches in the game. Ignore that 14 here. So 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can check that in the frame debugger, which also helps you then to figure out issues or where you can maybe combine stuff. So I can recommend, if you have problems or in general, use this frame debugger for finding bottlenecks or something in the graphic engine, whatever. So it's also recommended to use texture and sprite atlas because of this here. Oops. Yeah. This was one texture, which reduces batches. And so this is how my texture in work in progress looked like. So instead of having one single texture for each object, put them together in one, but where it makes sense. If you have an object like this one that is in one scene, then you use this one in another scene and this one in a third scene and nowhere else, it doesn't make sense. Because then Unity or the engine would load the whole texture every time the scene loads, and this is unnecessary. But if you have the objects all in the same scene, it makes sense to load them like this with one object. And the same is also for the UI. In Unity there's the UI sprite packer where you can put sprites together. But this also makes sense for the same UI regions, let's say that, or panels. If you have a panel with a lot of different sprites, it makes sense to put them together into one sprite atlas. So the conclusion about all of this: enable dynamic batching every time. Always enable GPU instantiating in the shaders. This was the one in the materials. Try to use not so many shaders. Use static batching for static objects. And when changing a color a lot, swap the materials instead of changing the color. And turn off SSAO if needed, or create the settings for the player to turn it off by themselves. I mean, maybe you even don't want SSAO in your project. Can also be. Create texture maps or atlas textures, sprite atlas, whatever you want to call them, because it makes sense. Oh, yep. And that was it for me. So, thank you. Any questions? Yep.
When did you start to worry about this, like batching and performance?
Too late. So, I noticed my problems with the performance when I uploaded the demo version of my previous, or the game I'm working on. And I noticed when I played it on the Steam Deck, it was very laggy. I have a good computer, so I didn't notice it on my computer. That was the problem. So good computers are not always helpful when developing a game. And I mean, I knew before that there are batches and that you should optimize them. But for my project, I was like, that's fine. It's just for testing, you know, it's just a small demo version, it will work. Nope. So this was also the reason I reworked the whole game visual-wise to reduce the amount of batches. And if I would start a new project, I would take a look at that from the beginning, because it saves a lot of time if you are trying to keep them low in the beginning and not if you have to rework everything afterwards. Yeah?
If you recommend turning on the dynamic batching every time and it's disabled by default, do you know if there is some drawback to it, or?
I have no idea, to be honest. I the funny thing is, in my Unity version I'm using it now, I couldn't find it. In another project I could find it, so I don't know if it's maybe turned off now because it's just unnecessary, I don't know. Because also for most of the objects, they are not smaller than 225 vertices. And if you can cover it with the GPU instancing, I have no idea why the dynamic batching even exists. So sorry.
Just curious.
Yep. Yeah.
What was the drawback to the GPU instancing again?
You mean the connection between the batches and the
GPU instancing?
what
was the bad part?
the GPU can just handle a specific amount of batches.
Okay.
And if you have too many batches, the GPU is like, oh no, input overload, no, stop, too much. So that's basically the problem. It's not fast enough to handle all that batches or draw calls that are sent from the CPU.
But only when you have GPU instancing?
No, this is the good part. So if you enable GPU instancing, I haven't covered that, sorry.
Yeah.
If you enable that, then before the objects are drawn from the GPU, the CPU sends the material before the objects. So like, okay, here you have the materials, and now draw this 480 times. And otherwise it would be like, hey, you have this object, here are the data for this object, and now is the material for this object, now draw that. Oh, now I have another object, which is the same, but I don't care, so draw this.
So it keeps sending the same thing over and over?
Yep, and this is unnecessary. And with the GPU instancing, it's like, hey, draw everything at once. Have fun with that. Yeah?
Is it not only for 3D or is it also for 2D games?
It's also for 2D. So my examples were for 3D, but draw calls and batching are the same also for 2D. Yeah?
Someone in the chat, I think it's Christian actually, asks, did you look into how transparency interacts with batching?
It breaks. So if you do anything with a material during the game, so like changing the color, which also is the transparency, it creates an instance of this material which breaks the batching. So I have also in my game a tree shader where the player is walking behind a tree, and in this case the tree is getting transparent, and then the batches break. So if you have 1,000 trees, you can imagine how bad it is. Yep. Yeah.
About the trees and about like semi-transparent materials, I read this trick. Like when you want to make materials semi-transparent but don't want to lose the batching, you can make a shader so some of the pixels will disappear. Like
yeah, I have that, but it breaks. Maybe I have a wrong shader. Maybe you can help me with that. I don't know.
No, each individual pixels is gonna be either fully visible or fully transparent. It's just the closer you are, like the more you can see, and the farther you are, the more pixels will disappear. I read that it's used in some games.
Okay.
But I also wanted to ask a question about like the changing colors. Like if you change a color of the material, isn't it like a single variable change which CPU sends to GPU? Hey, here's 4 new bytes of the new color, and it seems like it should be pretty fast. Why would changing color break anything?
Because an instance of this material is created, then it breaks, because it's an instance of the material and not the material that is basically in the scene, that is already sent to the GPU. And but if you change the material based on shared material, so that every object in the game that has this material is changing the color at the same time, then it shouldn't break, because it's not a new instance of the material.
Yes.
You have to separate this stuff. So if you have 3 apples and you want to have one apple red, the others green, and they are green by default, and you just change one apple to red, then this one red apple has an own material on it, an instantiated material.
Yeah, then I understand.
Yeah. Harry?
Not really a question, but because of the color change, when you also change the material of an object, it can be going smooth from one color to another. We have that with the game where the farming ground is dry and then it's getting wet, and before you change the color, right?
Yep.
And now you have that with the material swap and it's still a smooth
Yes.
change. So this is also possible because I think a lot of people think you have then no smooth
Yep.
transitions.
If you're changing materials and you want to have a like an lerp between this so that it's changing over time, you can lerp the materials as well. This is also a thing I learned about when I created this thing here. Just if you need it. It's a side note.
You can what the materials?
It's called lerp. There's this function where you lerp colors, for example, that it's slowly changing from, let's say, blue to
Oh,
green.
Yeah.
And you can do the same thing with materials as well.
Okay. Did you also look into the material property block?
In which topic of it?
Because I believe it would help if you don't want to create 4 materials, one for each color, or however many materials you need. You can use the property block and say set property block. That way, it'll do the same thing as having 4 individual, except you don't need to actually have 4 individual.
Okay, never heard of that, to be honest.
But you can say draw call. So if you need to set, because if you set 5 objects to be red, then that's like 5 new instances of the material. But if you use the property block, then Unity kind of knows that you're talking about the same thing on all of them, and then it's just one new thing.
Okay.
So it might be interesting if you have a lot of multiple things having changed variables during runtime.
Other questions? Then I guess this was a small, short talk today, but we don't have to do it every time, 1 hour, I think. So, thank you for being here, and yeah, I have no idea. Is something for next week planned?
I think because the Global Game Jam is on next week and
Yep.
we're taking a break. I will say to anybody who's watching or anybody in the house, if you want to do a talk, please contact Lena or post in at least in the thread or something if you think there's something you might want to talk about over the next. Because I'm not sure if we have any slots filled in February yet, but it'd be good to get more people talking. Failing that, I may end up doing another talk just to fill space. But I think maybe in the event of us not having talks, we may show stuff from the GDC vault if she still has access to that. But that wouldn't be on Twitch. That would be offline within the house, I think, because of copyright reasons and stuff. But we'll post if there are any talks. But feel free to contact Lena about it.
Then thank you also for at home. See ya.
Thank you.